welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow. I'm Sunanda Jayaseelan. This is your biggest platform for anything and everything to do with entrepreneurs. All of this week, we're putting the spotlight on the education space. What has changed? How has it changed? Why has it changed? And how are entrepreneurs like yourself responding to those changes? All of those big picture conversations all of this week. Today, I'm in conversation with two entrepreneurs who are joining us from the education space. Very exciting work being done by them, disrupting the market as we speak. Let me quickly introduce our entrepreneurs who are in the LOT hot seat tonight. First up, Vamsi Krishna, CEO co-founder at Vedantu. We have Sumeet Mehta, co-founder and CEO at Lead. Vamsi, it's been a while since we've had you joining us here on the Leaders of Tomorrow. Always good catching up with you, understanding, how things have been changing as far as the education market and space is concerned. Let me start by talking about the impact that the pandemic has really had on the edtech market. This perhaps is the one industry that's really seen positive news and welcome news really as far as the pandemic is concerned. Let me start by getting your thoughts on some of perhaps the biggest changes that you've seen.
Thanks, first of all, Anna, for having me on the show, and lovely to be chatting with you as always. Lot has happened over the last, in fact, not just 1 year. If you see, right from the pandemic times, like from last 18 odd months, things have been, for lack of a better word, very happening. And yes, EdTech has obviously been, witnessing very strong tailwinds for very obvious structural reasons. Yes, overall, EdTech has been growing very well as an industry, especially in India. And also, people have spoken about EdTech quite elaborately during the pandemic times. But let me also probably, tell you folks that even before pandemic was there, EdTech in India was witnessing a very strong, growth rates. In fact, even like I can talk about Vedantu, we were growing at almost 2.5 to 3 times every year, right from 2017 onwards. So all of 2018 and 19 and even 20, the growth rate has been great. Yes, pandemic has probably come in and probably increased the growth rate by, that 3x became all the way to 4.5 to 5x. Yes, that has happened. But even before that, the growth rates were great. And structurally, the reason behind that is if you look at a country like India, especially all the developing economies, there is a very strong cultural context for parents where they look in to give very high quality teaching and make that accessible to their kids. And for a vast country like India, the access to that is challenging, right? There's always this last mile problem. And that is where EdTech, specifically powered by internet and technology, comes into play, because this really solves the last mile problem. And that's fundamentally the reason why you would look at EdTech doing great, not just during the pandemic times, but in general. And we definitely foresee the growth rates not to be as crazy as like 5x, 6x, but definitely being strong even once we enter into the normal period of time. So that's on the general perspective on the sector itself. Coming to Vedantu, obviously we being the pioneer and the leader in the space of live online classes, I think as an entrepreneur, I'm obviously very, very happy to see the category coming alive and really becoming mainstream during this, last 18 months. This was a category, if you remember, we started way back in 2014. We were the first company to start with live classes, live online classes. And especially during the last, 15 odd months, every school, every offline, online player have been doing some form or the other way of online classes. And as an entrepreneur, that's most satisfying for me. This is a category which is obviously it's been there, but this pandemic times has suddenly made it mainstream. And as a result of that, Vedantu being a pioneer in that, witnessed very, very strong growth rates. Just to give you some sense on the numbers, a year back, which was 2019-20, we were doing around 7 lakh students used to come and take free live class on the Vedantu's app and web. That used to be the number, and that number from 7 lakh grew all the way to 7.5 million over the last year. And that's the kind of the growth rates we have seen. Just giving you a sense on the scale, and all other metrics, including like revenue and all other kind of engagement metrics, everything saw a huge spike. So yes, it's been crazy last 15-18 months, but we are not complaining. We're very happy about it.
So we are looking at perhaps the opening up, the reopening really of schools and educational institutions as we speak, Vamsi. How's that perhaps going to have, and what sort of impact perhaps, if any, will that have on the edtech market?
Sure, definitely. I mean, as we see, in fact, things are already opening up, and we are seeing that stuff happening in for the last 2 to 3 months. My strong sense, and this is like coming from both the perspectives of interacting and looking at data of our own users, and also probably seeing the trends across the industry in general. Needless to say, we are not expecting the growth rates of that 5x to 6x, which used to be there in the pandemic times, to sustain. I mean, obviously, none of us are expecting that. Before pandemic, wherein we used to grow around 2.5 to 3 times, and in pandemic it grew up to like almost 5.5 to 6 times. My sense is it will somewhere settle in between these two, right? And if we can, at Vedantu, at least personally, the targets we have taken up and the projections we have taken up is of 3x, year on year. If we're able to see that kind of a trajectory happening into next year itself, we'll be very happy. Just for context, as of today, we are like, just last month, we are still growing at around 3.7 to 3.8x year on year. So the trajectory is still strong. And my expectation is at least, 3x is something which I'm expecting. And that's kind of the growth rate which I would see it would sort of like, plateau around. And if we can sustain that, that itself would be a very good growth rate.
So, when we're talking about technology and how the market is being disrupted by tech companies, by businesses like yourself, are we primarily talking about an urban audience, or how are consumers who are in the smaller cities, in the tier 3, tier 4 markets, how are they perhaps also responding to the digitization and really the use of technology when it comes to education, Vamsi?
Great question, Sunanda. So in fact, let me just share some stats over here, right? Um, Earlier, when we started way back in 2014 and 15, at Vedantu, what we used to see was somewhere around like 80-85% of the students and parents coming in from top metros, which is probably the top 7-8 cities, right? And the rest all was like other than that. Um, in India, structurally, like with the broadband, getting mainstream, the internet penetration through 4G getting like, really penetrating, we have seen strong shifts in this pattern, right? So fast forward to today, if I just give you the stat of the current, months, we see in our free student user base, right, almost somewhere around 78 to 80% of the students coming in from tier 2 and below, right? Tier 2 and below cities, right? Which imagine like just 5 years back used to be 85% from not even tier 1, just the top 7-8 cities, right? So this is a big shift, and this is for free students, even for paid students, right? This is like around 57 to 58% of Vedantu's paid students come from tier 2 and below cities, right? And which clearly gives you a very strong sense that the need for this kind of a platform, which is essentially great academic quality teaching and content accessible at a lower cost, is clearly much more in need in tier 2 and below cities, tier 3, tier 4 cities, than as compared to, let's say, metro. Because in a metro, naturally we have access to some good teachers around us, right? It's not that we don't have access to good teachers, right? Yes, there are issues of travel and all that stuff, right? But if you actually go to a tier 3 and tier 4 city, even if you are ready to pay, right, if you have the paying propensity, even then the access to a good quality teacher and teaching is hard to come by. And that is where we see the solutions like these has a much more higher appeal in tier 2 and below. And going forward also, that is an area where we see will further continue to increase right from where we are.
Vamsi? As always, good chatting with you here on the Leaders of Tomorrow.
Hey, thanks, Sunanda.
And we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm in conversation with Sumeet Mehta, co-founder and CEO at Lead. Welcome back with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow. Tonight, I'm in conversation with Sumeet Mehta of Lead. He's our entrepreneur joining us in the LOT hot seat. Sumeet, thanks for joining us and taking the time here on the Leaders of Tomorrow. How do you want to introduce your business? How do you want to introduce Lead to our viewers?
Yeah, see, Lead was born out of my personal journey. I grew up in a small town in Punjab and then moved to Singapore. And I felt that India's future will continue to be limited unless we unleash the suppressed potential in our small towns. And look, the challenge in India is that opportunity and access to high quality schooling is a function of where you were born. So if you're born to a rich family in a metro, you have access to some really great schools. But unfortunately, if you're born in a small town or in a middle class or lower middle class family, you get condemned to rote learning and really poor exposure. And we all know that India lives in its small towns. So LEAD is powering schools around the country so that an excellent education is both accessible and affordable to all children. And we built an integrated system of school transformation that is currently working with close to 2,000 schools in over 450 cities around the country.
Looking at some of the data, reports suggesting you've grown 3x times during this pandemic. What has largely driven this growth, Sumit? Where has that growth come from is what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, see, during the pandemic, schools were shut, but schooling was on, and school owners were struggling to come to terms with the sudden lockdowns. So instead of taking a pause, we doubled down on two fronts. One, we ensured that all our 700 partner schools from last year were able to provide uninterrupted schooling to their children through our Lead School at Home platform. So this actually created a very positive word of mouth among school owners that if you want to really continue uninterrupted schooling, Lead is the right partner. And then we also, our teams reached out to school owners who were grappling in the pandemic, and we presented them a solution that helped them. And I feel ultimately, if you solve customers' problems and you are there for them, that's the simplest path to growth. So to my mind, that's really our secret recipe.
You started, I understand, largely to empower students from low-income families to ensure that they're getting a quality education. I'm curious, is this a profitable segment to be in? What is your business model like, and what kind of schools do you work with? Is it tier one, tier two, private, public? Just give us a sense of that.
Sure. See, we want to transform schooling in India. So our target is to work with all the schools. But in India, if you leave out government schools where the problems are different, the largest segment is affordable schools, and no one was solving their problems when we began this journey. So that became our starting point. But where we start won't limit where we go. So I think essentially we want to work with all schools. On your question on profitability, see, my sense is that if you design your solution well, unit economics take care of themselves. It just requires deep design thinking for the unique context of our customer in a financially responsible manner, which is what we've done. So I think profitability is not an issue at all. And currently, if you ask me, our partner schools are well spread across more than 450 cities. So we are present both in metros and in small towns. But just because there are many more small towns, we are also in many more small towns.
While edtech in the education space, perhaps at least edtech is definitely booming. Education in India still largely, remains a not-for-profit model. Do you think that the time is ripe for that to change?
Well, I mean, the space is not non-profitable. The space, I think, from a regulatory standpoint, is not for profit. And my sense is that's not even the biggest issue. The issue in India is twofold. One is that the quality of school supply is very poor. So there are only a handful of good schools, and basic economics 101. If supply is really limited, then that limited supply can actually demand a very high fees, and that's what you see happening in good schools in metros. So the solution out of this is we must increase the supply of good schools, and fee and pricing will take care of itself. So that's one issue, which is how do we increase the supply of good schools. Second, there is over-regulation and fee control. So, I think government and regulators, if they can focus on improving supply versus focusing on regulating the current supply, we will be a lot better. I think we need to trust our schools. We need to trust our school owners. So we must incentivize innovation in this field by cutting down on excessive control and regulation.
You've raised quite a bit of funds. Sumeet, give us a sense of what you're going to be using that for.
Sure. See, I mean, the problem that we're solving is a large and deep one, so it will require persistent effort and transformative thinking. So we're bringing together investors who see the long-term potential in education in India, who see that this is an enormous opportunity, both from an impact and financial return perspective. The funds that we've used, we're going to deploy them to innovate in the areas of product, technology. We will invest in research, in curriculum and pedagogy, and we'll use those funds to reach out to more schools.
So, what advice would you have for entrepreneurs who are looking to fundraise and are perhaps in the edtech space?
Well, I think it really depends on your motivation. What we see currently is that there are a lot of metrics, which are not necessarily connected to student learning outcomes. My thesis is that in the long term, people who will succeed in this area are people who solve the core problem of learning outcomes. And my sense is once you start solving for learning outcomes, growth comes, retention comes, and then fundraise becomes easier. So don't go for the latest fad in terms of engagement and think that technology is the be all and end all. I think if we keep the learning challenge at the core and then design our technology and systems around it and are very focused on the right metrics, then I think this is a really large market, really large problem to solve, and you will get investor interest.
So even as we're seeing the growth and the proliferation really of edtech, it's not necessarily something that's accessible to most students, I would assume. And if anything, the digital divide really is becoming, much wider. How would you like to address that?
Yeah, no, this is, I agree, a really large problem. And I would like to break it into two parts. I think in the short term, we really need to work in a mission mode to reopen our schools safely. I've written a lot about this, that, the 5 or 7 point agenda on how do we vaccinate all school staff on priority. How do we ensure that, protocols for safe school reopening are deployed? And essentially, we should only close schools if it is absolutely required in that local area. It is not a national decision. For 16 months, students not going to school is a travesty. So in the short term, all of us need to be committed to reopening schools safely. In the long term, I think schools will have to innovate to basically incorporate a lot of new curriculum, pedagogy, and technology in their way of working. And I see a blended model where the local teacher in the school, she needs to be enabled through the use of technology. And then she also needs to be supplemented through some kind of centralized technology platform. So there is a lot of innovation that is up ahead of us in really transforming our education system. The openness amongst private school owners, I can already see happening. The openness in government to embrace it, I think, is really required.
So, according to you, Sumeet, what are some of the steps that the government needs to take and take urgently to ensure that education is available and quality education is available to students who are in more, public schools in tier 3, tier 4 markets? What would you have to say?
Yeah, I think in the short term, first and foremost, make it a priority to reopen schools safely. And government school children are the most hit in the last 16 months because they haven't gone to school, they don't have access to data or device, so they haven't had any learning. And the number of cases of child malnutrition, child abuse, child trafficking, mental health issues that we are hearing are just like of catastrophic proportions. So we really need to work on reopening schools safely. I think if we can do that, then at least we take the first step. And the second step, I mean, there are 1 million government schools in the country, and more than half the students go to government schools. So we really need to take steps towards transforming the quality of government schools. And I think NEP is a great step from a policy standpoint. But in terms of improving the quality of government schools, it is a really deep problem. It starts from system incentives, bringing in accountability, and then capability building. It is a long-term problem, but I think if there is a will, then there is a way.
You were talking about the NEP in the short term. Are you anticipating that it'll really have any impact? Will there be any changes? What are you looking forward to seeing?
I would caveat it by saying that any policy is only as good as the execution. We've had other frameworks in the past. The NCF 2005 was a great framework, but it wasn't implemented well. And the challenge in our country is implementation. It is not policy. We've got great thinkers, we've got great policymakers, but we don't have really good execution. The other thing which has affected NEP is that it came at a time when the pandemic was hurting us and affecting all schools. So we haven't really seen the full potential of NEP in action.
Any plans in the near term that you can let us in on, Sumeet?
See, our vision, like I said, is we want to transform schools in our country and really take India amongst the top 5 in PISA rankings. Currently, India is amongst the bottom 3 last time we checked. So I think there has to be a significant shift in the quality of learning and schooling that we provide to our students. For this, we will be the school of choice for parents around the country who are looking for international standard education for their children. And we're going to partner with more and more schools to improve their quality and help them with a network of innovation. And we will really bring more innovation to schooling in India. In the next 5 years, we aim to serve 20 million students across 50,000 schools. And we see that if we do that, we will be well on our way to bringing a big change in Indian education.
Sumeet, good chat here on the Leaders of Tomorrow. Completely out of time on this episode. If you have any feedback for us, as always, we love hearing from you. Our contact details on your screens as we speak. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.